Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies. And now, here's Popcorn Talk's Anatomy of a Movie.
Yes, welcome to Retro Anatomy of a Movie. There is no James Bond movie until November. Thanks. The one enemy that even Bond can't defeat, the coronavirus, has sidelined 007. So even though there'll be no time to die, or unfortunately time to die, we will still be talking today about the first James Bond film, Dr. No, which conveniently none of us have seen. Hello, and as I said, welcome to Retro Anatomy of a Movie. I'm Blatt, Christian Bladt. Thank you.
That was great.
That's all I thought about.
Amazing.
That's all I thought about is how I was going to start the show. But I'll let each of you choose whether or not you want to follow
I'm Bond girl number 1. She's Bond girl number 2.
I'm Ryder.
Yeah.
Honey Ryder.
Honey Rider, yeah.
No, my name is Alexa Cappiello.
And I'm Goodman, Rachel Goodman.
Yeah, so you're the only one who didn't do it.
I didn't.
She's so special.
Cappiello. Alexa
So,
Cappiello.
I have seen many James Bond movies, a few of the Sean Connerys, but when I was a kid, Roger Moore was James Bond, so that's all I knew for a while there. It was just
Pierce Brosnan is my James
Sure,
Bond.
yeah.
me too.
I mean, and somewhere somebody is like a Timothy Dalton guy.
Yeah.
They have to be out there.
There is somebody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like him in pretty much everything he's done that isn't James Bond. But anyway, overall thoughts on Dr. No. I'm going to go first to Rachel because she's exploding with
She brought props.
Yeah.
She's
brought-
like very prepared.
This is Casino Royale. This is the first James Bond book. I bought it because it is the only physical James Bond book I own. My other book I own is the Dr. No 6th James Bond book, which is my ebook. So I brought it in to showcase that for everybody.
Yes.
My overall thoughts, though, I watched the movie first.
Yes.
Then I read the book. The movie was amazing. I absolutely loved the shot we get with James Bond playing solitaire. That was my take on that. All I'm going to say on the book, though, there's going to be more later, but I have to say this now. The way that the book ends, it ends like you're reading a romance novel. And it's worse than the movie. It's in a different way.
Is it very descriptive?
Oh, it is descripted. I'll wait till the segment and I'll talk more about it.
That's
But
a great way to tease it forward.
yeah.
Overall thoughts from you, Happy Cappiello.
So, I didn't really grow up with the James Bond movies. I was more of my dad was more of a Pink Panther fan, which
Oh, those are good too.
those are great
Yeah.
movies. But in terms of, spy movies and all that. So James Bond movies I've seen here and there. I mostly watched the Pierce Brosnan versions because I was old enough to really understand. So this was my first encounter with Sean Connery as Bond, James Bond.
So this is the first time you've ever seen him with his shirt off.
Yeah, and I was very impressed with Mr. Connery.
Look, in
Being all Sean
1962,
Connery.
men with their shirt off weren't always in shape. Let's just put it that
No.
way. So
Brian's song.
yeah. Oh, yeah. We talked last week about Brian, and that's 1971.
Yeah.
And James Caan could not put his, could not put his shirt on fast enough for me. It was very disturbing, actually. I don't ever want to see Jimmy Caan with his shirt off again in anything. But so yeah,
I didn't finish.
I thought you did.
I just said that I was impressed with Sean.
Yeah.
No, but I liked it. I liked it overall. I don't think it's my favorite James Bond movie. My issues with it are that the plot in all of these, not just this one, just felt very convoluted. I'm like, all right, let's get to the action. But that's just a James Bond movie.
I mean, I thought it was fun. I've had a lot more fun with James Bond movies. You have to, of course, look at this in the way this is going to be the first time that anybody sees any of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you sort of grade on a curve in that respect. But there were definitely a few things that surprised me. The biggest thing that I thought surprised me was that we don't hear about Dr. No for like the first 35 minutes, and we don't meet him so I put this note. We meet him at the 87-minute mark. There are only 20 minutes left in the movie.
I know.
And we finally meet Dr. No.
Finally.
Which is very different.
I would assume it's very different. That's different from any Bond movie that I can remember. You don't meet him right away. That would be ridiculous. But the fact that we wait so long, we don't get that much of him. So I was definitely a little bit surprised that that's when we got him. But, it's just more like, okay, I think there's a lot more you could have done. And yes, we hear him off camera, but we don't really meet him.
Yeah.
So did you guys catch, obviously the Austin Powers series are
Yes.
spoofing off of these. And so
That's the whole time I thought of Austin Powers.
The whole time I was like, sharks with freaking laser beams. And Dr. No looks
and Dr. No is
pretty
dressed,
identical.
he's dressed like Dr. Evil.
Yeah, Dr. Evil,
And at
Dr.
one point,
Evil, Dr. No.
He does come in and tell James $1 million.
the cost
Yeah,
of
the
the
cost
picture.
of-
parallels,
Yeah,
which I
exactly.
thought was amazing to pick out. you
Yeah.
know?
The moment when they're on the I'm going to call it a conveyor belt when they're getting washed.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, this is Austin coming out of cryogenics.
I'm
like, wow.
the decontamination unit is what you're talking
I
about?
was waiting for them to have to pee.
There's somewhere, yeah.
And then it just be a continuous thing where they don't stop.
I was waiting for him to mention his mojo, personally.
There's that. Look, there's little
There we
things
go.
that you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or call himself a man of mystery.
Yeah,
I was waiting for it all.
There's little things that you can take from a lot of Bond films, but yeah, there was a lot in this one that you can see.
I was
in Austin
shocked that Dr. No was not just completely Chinese, and then on top of that, they actually cast just a white guy in the role, and they did makeup to make him look more half Asian.
Let's remember
and this
that
is the time, but at
this
the
is
same time,
the example I always use.
That would not have held up.
Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Yeah,
Mickey Rooney
Mickey
plays an
Rooney.
Asian guy, and also just another great example, the Orson Welles classic. Charlton Heston plays a Mexican.
How about Leonard Nimoy playing a Native American on Rawhide?
Yeah,
Same time period.
Well,
So,
and they had to hide the pointy ears.
Yeah,
so that was
yeah.
part of the problem. I think that look, there's a lot of fun in here, and we'll kind of go through some of the specifics of it. Again, it's the first film in the series. I think they do a great job setting up Bond. They do make us wait for him. I did think that the title sequence where we hear the theme for the first time, they did a good job sort of like showing that. Now, Ryan in the booth was referring to whether or not there was like a song, because a lot of the more recent, all of the Roger Moore ones from then on.
Madonna did one.
There's like
Die Another Day.
Yes.
A View to a Kill by Duran Duran, which is one of the all-time greats.
Adele did one.
Adele, that was my favorite one.
And the one that we're
Adele.
going to get in the movie that'll be in November is Billie Eilish. So
Yeah.
apparently she's
okay.
going to whisper a James Bond song.
I think it's out already because I think I've
Yeah,
heard
no,
it.
the song's
yeah.
that way because the movie
Yeah.
was supposed to come
Yeah.
out. So they released the song, and we'll all forget it by the time that it comes out. Chris Cornell, I think, did Quantum of Solace.
Yeah.
I think that. But this being the first one, you're like, there's that theme that we're able to think back on.
And see, that's what impressed me is this idea. We see James Bond and we're like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, that's just the theme. Sorry, I didn't mean to hit you. That's just the theme. That's just what they do. They do variations of the same theme song. But that's what impressed me is that this was the very first time. And yes, they're adapting it from a book, but there's no musical score in a book. So they created this theme song that has now caught on for generations.
And the whole opening sequence as
Yeah,
well that has
as
appeared in every single James Bond movie. In different variations, but same sort of looking through a gun barrel at James Bond, him shooting and all that stuff. I mean, it's so iconic. And the reason, they decided to do James Bond as a series of movies. And I think that was so smart of them to do. And on top of that, make this through line with A, the song, B, James Bond in different situations, and C, the opening sequence. That just made it what it is today, and which is an iconic.
what I appreciate too is not only did they open with that shape, but there were multiple moments where they had passageways that were also shaped like the barrel. So they had a callback to that. And even in the lighting and the way that they had certain like sets, it called back to this idea of somebody being in like a circular object.
Oh, cool.
So I was loving that. I did very much appreciate what they did with the scenery in Jamaica, but I think that what I loved the most were the scenes that we saw in Dr. No's headquarters, where we got to see the darkness and we got to see the extravagance too, but the dark in the sense that we got the contrast between the light coming through some of the very tiny windows against the dark.
Yeah.
And that moment where we see, I believe his name was Dent.
The professor.
Yeah, the
yes,
professor,
yes, he
who
was.
is not in the book, but where we see him go and we just hear Dr. No's voice. That was probably one of my favorite scenes next to the moment at Taro's house.
And it's pretty amazing what they did on the budget they had. They had $1 million budget.
You didn't say it right. $1 million. Yeah, I did read that. I was shocked. That it was online.
They did most of it in sound stages. Of course, they did film a little bit in Jamaica as well. But a lot of my notes or what I found about it were like how they overcame the really crappy budget that they had. One being, so everyone knows the iconic scene with the fish. You know, Dr. No is talking about the fish, and of course, James Bond references them as well, and that's where we got sharks with freaking laser beams coming out of their foreheads. But they had such a low budget that it wasn't a real aquarium in Dr. No's apartment. It was a disaster. They said they had so little money. We decided to use a rear projection screen and get some stock footage of fish. And they weren't even large fish. They were like tiny fish.
So they just zoomed in.
Yes.
That's fantastic. Look, it didn't look terrible,
right,
you know.
But then Bond has a line saying like, "Oh, the fish, they look magnified." It's literally he just has to acknowledge the fact that they had such little money, and that was what they can do. But
that goldfish is the size of a whale,
right?
Yeah.
And she mentioned set design as well. Dr. No's sets or the furniture, excuse me, and his what do you call it? Ground lair.
Yeah.
They were both contemporary and antiques because they just didn't have a lot of budget. And they're like, let's just throw both in there because he's kind of a contemporary antique kind of man, and it looks rich.
Yeah. Right. Look, he's anytime anybody's a criminal mastermind or any kind of evil genius, you're able to just assume there's some eccentricities.
They also had Goya's portrait of the Duke of Wellington, which was missing at the time, so they thought it would be funny to put it in the movie.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and they did, suggesting that Dr. No had stolen it. And then, of course, somebody steals it off of their set.
That's even better.
And it's crazy because, I mean, I looked that up too because when they zoomed in on that portrait and didn't explain it, I was like, that's gotta be something. And so right in the notes, Duke of Wellington and
pretty funny.
Yeah.
Well, one of the interesting things about this is that this is not the first time that everyone meets Sean Connery. He had largely been a television actor. He had previously starred in a film that it's right about the time for Darby O'Gill and the Little People. And if you've never seen Darby O'Gill and the Little People, you're missing out for one very important reason. He sings in that movie. I assume it's lip synced. He does sing in it. And he interacts with a bunch of leprechauns, which I think is a term I can still use in 2020, but please let me know if we're not allowed to call them leprechauns. I don't even know.
Why? Because they're tiny Irishmen?
I don't even know. I don't even know what ethnicity they are. Don't ask me. I'm going to stay out of it. Trying to get me in trouble? I don't know what they are.
Leprechauns are Irish.
That's what you say. All right? So I do think that, mass audiences were probably finding him for the first time. And so I think that makes that reveal that we referenced. I like that he's playing cards and we don't see him. As soon as we do, it's like, hey, we do have this awesome theme. Let's go ahead and use it here. You know, I thought that was great.
So my thing is that he, with his accent, obviously James Bond is supposed to be British. So my thing is going into this, I was like, okay, it had been a while since I had seen a Sean Connery Bond movie. So I was like, okay, how is he going to sound? To me, you could not tell that he had a Scottish accent.
No, not at all.
Very rare. Like there were a couple of words I was like, okay. I definitely think he played into the British element of the character.
Yeah.
And also, you kind of went back again to the scene where he's playing solitaire.
Well, I'm talking about when he's in the card game. In
the beginning.
But yes,
with Sylvia.
I did like it's funny that you referenced it. I'm like, well, what else is he going to do to pass the time? Sure, he's going to play solitaire.
That was my other favorite scene, was when he was in Taro's house and he had kicked her out, and he's waiting and he's literally just playing solitaire, but like the dark lighting and the fact that we have Dent who comes running in, kills the pillow, and then he aims the silencer at Bond, and Bond knows that he already used his 6 shots, so he's not going to get him. Also, the whole thing in the beginning about the Beretta and how they had forced Bond to get rid of his Beretta and go with a Walther, that was something that you hear more about from the books, and they have a bigger explanation as to why. But I did find it interesting. That was my one note on the movie, though, was that M mentions the Beretta in the beginning of the movie, and you see Bond using the guns, but it never comes back in through dialogue.
No, I was expecting that being set
Me
up
too.
for a reason.
It is more in the
book,
books.
and I don't know why you include it if you're going to cut any other reference to it. But the things that we learn in him talking about it is that he's been using it for 10 years, so that's how you get a sense for how long he's. We assume that's how long he's been a 00 agent, and then also apparently the last time he used it jammed and he ended up in the hospital. So it's like there's a reason for it. Now, is that an adventure that actually happened? So that is an Ian Fleming novel.
And I can
Do you know which one that is?
Okay, so this is what I'm going to assume. I have not read the 5th book.
Right.
The way they set it up,
that it would be the 5th one.
Yeah. So what can I I'm just going to talk a little bit.
We'll talk about the book as a whole. But yeah, if you have a point, sure. Yeah. No reason to not bring it up.
Yeah, I'm just going to mention this now. In the book, basically they explain the whole thing. I'm presuming the 5th book. James was attacked by a Russian spy, and they actually injected him with a drug. And this is what happened. The reason why they were able to do this is because he went to shoot the Beretta and he made a mistake and it didn't go off the right way. And that's why they were able to drug him. And so he basically had to spend a good 3 months in the hospital because of this. And at the beginning of the book, kind of like the movie, that's why M is saying you can't use this gun anymore.
Use it anymore.
In the book, they actually dive deeper and say that it's Bond's punishment.
It's interesting that they're referencing it. It's almost they're like using the movie to sell books, which is such a quaint idea. It's from 60 years ago. It's like, well, if you like movies, maybe you know how to read too. So it's sort of like, I know you're saying that it's different, but it is sort of dealing with the mythology of the character from the books.
And it also I just feel like the book was further reading. You can actually get more into the character, and
that's what I was going to ask in terms of who James Bond is as a character. Do you get a better sense of who he is? Because with every James Bond movie that comes out, with every actor, that we see that
they're
plays
all guys.
James.
It's okay.
Yes, they are. I would love to see a female James Bond. That would be fun. But
that would be fun.
Each actor that plays him brings a different aspect of usually themselves to the role. And I'm wondering if there's a sort of through line as to who he is as a person that you could talk more about, because I'm interested to know who he is in the book.
And Alexa's basically saying, I'm never going to read the book.
I'm never going to read the book, so you tell me.
Yeah.
Okay, so
and everyone else.
He is not okay. So in the movie, you know how he slept with Taro and he flirted with M's secretary.
Yes,
and then
he's
he
just a womanizer.
So, it's in my notes. Yeah.
In the book, there's only one person he flirts with, and that would be Honey.
Okay.
And that is
less of a hoe.
Yeah, he'll notice if a woman is attractive, but he is not this he's not this sex icon. He's more of just he's more of just an international spy.
What I like is I just think it's a great character trait. You were referencing Taro after he kicks her out of her house. That look. There's nobody can do a one-night stand the way that James Bond does, because a lot of people, male or female, will sneak out.
Yeah.
He's just, I'm going to throw you out of your own house.
I'm literally going to throw you out.
I'm going to stay, but you're out. And I know it's your house, but I'm going to stay here. And it's just only James Bond can get away with that. I thought it was interesting. And it's very apparent from just those first few minutes. It's like, man, he's he's very, very close talking Moneypenny. And he has a great line that really stood out. It's just like, why don't you ever take me to dinner? And he's just like, well, if I did, I'd be arrested for treason for abusing government property. Yeah. And it's just like, oh my God, there's so many things wrong with that line now. But in 1962, you're like, oh, he's so smart.
Is he cold and calculating, or is he more of like a renegade, rogue kind of?
So, okay, this is how I would say from the book. He is very, he is kind of cold. He does not talk. He doesn't really tell you what he's thinking. Though there are moments with Dr. No and with the other people he meets that he does get worked up, and I think
So he
it's
has a
noticeable.
temper.
He does have a temper at times, but then other times he doesn't say anything. He's also very compassionate. And he really, like with Honey, and I can talk more about this when we get to the section,
sure.
but with Honey, he is very caring toward her.
Aww.
Yeah, it was very sweet.
Wow.
It read like a romance, to be honest.
I mean, she shows up in a bikini with a knife, I mean, what's not to
well,
love?
in the book, she was nude.
Well, there you go. So let's actually talk about some of the rest of the cast. I was very excited to see Jack Lord, McGarrett from Hawaii Five-0, obviously the original Hawaii Five-0. I thought I didn't actually realize he was in this. So, and he is, that character's name is Felix because it's the same name as my son, but now I've forgotten what his last name is.
Oh, Leiter?
Yeah, Felix Leiter. Yeah,
the
you.
American.
Yeah, exactly. So that was great to see, and I thought Ursula Andress as Honey does a great job. Her voice is, of course, dubbed because she's a Swedish actress. Yes.
Do you want to know what I found especially hilarious though? Is that she showed up it was the 1967 Casino Royale spoof of James Bond.
Right.
Yeah.
Which until the Daniel Craig one was the only filmed version of Casino Royale, but it was that's like non-canon, not real James Bond.
No.
It's like the spoof. Though the character is named James Bond in it, right?
Yeah, it's still James Bond. It's basically just a major spoof on everything.
So she's actually in that. I did not realize that.
Yeah.
She was cast based on looks alone. I know, shocking for a Bond girl, right?
Yeah,
just shocking. Apparently, somebody else was Julie Christie, was considered but discarded as discarded.
I mean,
as producers.
That is kind of what Bond does. He just sort of discard them.
As the producers felt that she was not voluptuous enough, and of course, bringing up the picture of her in the bikini.
Well, I mean,
this is honestly one of the most iconic images in all of Bond history films.
I mean, I had certainly seen this image before.
Bikini went for, oh goodness, I can't forget. Okay, here. It sold in 2001 at an auction for $61,000 $61,000.
Did they include the knife, or is it just the bikini?
Just the bikini, I think.
Wow.
And it's what inspired, I think, a change in women's swimsuits, because they hadn't really had a lot of bikinis back in 1962. It wasn't a style staple. And then she wore it on TV, and then all of a sudden, women's fashion changed because of that bikini.
And so thank you, Ursula Andress.
Yeah.
Me personally,
I also, from a woman's perspective, I really appreciate that. She's not, what you think in your brain is like the perfect woman. Like, she's got those curves. Like, she's beautiful, of course, but she's not picture perfect. And I really appreciate it.
It's a very different standard for the definition
of course, it's back in 1960s.
Marilyn Monroe wouldn't get a callback today.
I know.
Never.
Yeah. So
especially with the Twiggies in the world once we hit the 60s.
Yes,
yeah,
it's true.
So let's see. So when we've talked a little bit about some of the rest of the cast, I thought that it's interesting. I think they did a good job. Look, setting this story in Jamaica, I did wonder. I'm like, how is him interacting with the locals going to go? But I thought that they did a good job. Look, it could have been problematic. I think some of his approach towards women. It's the flirting, and then the women who show up in his room and want to be there, that's fine. The flirting with Moneypenny, I'm like, oh, is this going to be like every woman that he meets?
Literally every single woman who's attractive.
Right, and just she's the only one I mean, come on. So if you're not attractive, he doesn't even see you.
Exactly. You don't exist.
Yeah. Well, and the thing, too, is that I'm surprised in 62 that they would be able to show a scene like that with Taro, where they wait, like he goes and he starts kissing her, and and then the next frame over, he's like naked in bed, and it's implied that they slept together. I'm assuming this was probably one of the most risque things you could see at the movies at the time.
Yep.
Well, and if you think about sort of during the title sequence, there's the silhouette like go-go dancing. I remember watching that. I'm like, oh, this was probably really racy at that time.
Yeah.
You know, just like look at the way that she's moving. So yeah, I think that
Don't bring your kids.
The whole thing is probably, you know, I mean, you got the bikini and let's see, does he sleep with 3 women in this movie, or am I missing someone?
Well, I guess
there's the woman who shows up in his hotel room, you know, just wearing a shirt and playing golf.
Yeah, Sylvia.
So that's one.
Sylvia.
And then Taro. And obviously, eventually,
Honey.
So
Yeah.
but that's it, though.
That's it. I mean, he flirted with
It's an hour and 49 minutes. Come on, James.
but he does
There's
flirt.
other women in the movie.
In the book, there's one. There's one woman, and that's the thing is that
I don't think I like literary James Bond. I like a movie James Bond.
I appreciate literary James Bond so much better. I'm sorry, Sean Connery, but the literary version was way cooler.
This is a great moment to transition to literary James Bond.
Oh my gosh,
We're not
can't
going to
wait.
spend the whole rest of the show on it, but I know you have so many things. And the fact that you read a 260-page book just last night, I'm just in awe of.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I couldn't even finish the movie last night. I was and then I had to do it this morning.
That's how good the book was, though.
Yeah.
It went
Oh,
by. Okay, now I'm going to start with everything with Honey because
Sure.
we've been talking a lot about her. The first thing I want to say is that in the book, Honey has a broken nose. And so this whole thing, remember when she's collecting seashells in the movie?
Yeah.
She's doing it for a purpose. In the book, she's doing it because, I'm laughing because it's kind of funny, she's doing it because she needs money to go to America to buy the surgery to fix her nose. And in the end, literary James Bond says, honey, I love your nose the way it is. Please don't get the surgery.
Oh, what an
what
old
a
softie.
He is so protective of her, and he only sleeps with her, and he doesn't do it until the end. And now here's this part made me laugh. The last chapter is called Slave Time.
Whoa! Slave time!
And you can take a guess as to why.
So it's very...
Okay,
so they're not in like a rowboat at that point?
Oh, well, they were in a rowboat, but then its ending is different because they don't end in the rowboat. They end up somewhere else in like an actual house. And the thing that made me laugh is that, I write crime and I also write romance. 2 different pen names. I felt like I was reading a romance novel. Actually, let me specify, I felt like I was reading an erotica novel.
So they just go into it.
They go into it, and literally I'm just going to read the last 2
Please
lines.
do.
Or last 3 lines. You owe me slave time, but... The last line, do as you're told. That is the last line of this novel.
You owe me slave time.
Yeah, and the
Wow.
page before, it got graphic. And I'm like, wow, because this book was written in the 50s.
Yeah, 1958, I think.
Yeah, 58. Yeah, by Ian Fleming. There's now an award based on him, based on his work. So his writing is amazing.
Have you read other Bond books? I mean, I know you have Casino Royale.
I've read this one too, Casino Royale.
So that's the only other one you have. But does it have like descriptive like sex scenes like that one, or just as far as you know the 2 you've read?
My mouth was open with this one. I was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't, and I read a lot of crime, and this was just like, wow, I did not expect that. So that's just to kind of.
Her name's also longer, right? It's not just Honey Rider.
It's Honey Child.
Honey Child Rider.
But
Yeah.
in the credits for the movie, it does say Honey Child.
Oh, it does.
So I think that they just didn't put it in the dialogue. Okay, a couple more things, and then I'll be done. They spend more time in the beginning with they explain what happened with Strangway a little bit more clearly in terms of what he was up to.
Sure.
They don't mention the messing with the rockets until the very end when Dr. No, it's like the last 75% of the book is where they get into it, and Dr. No basically gives this long monologue about how that's his ultimate goal.
Which is funny because that's a convention of later Bond films, is the long monologue where they explain everything they're going to do because, you're not going to get out of here, so let me tell you what I'm going to do, and then you're able to stop him because he told you everything he's going to do. Sure.
Until this point, Bond knew there was something deeper, but all he really knew on the surface was that it was about bird poop. Literally, it was about a rare species of bird, and they were able to mine the poop because it was good for fertilizer, and that's why Dr. No was on this Crab Key Island. So that's a major difference. Yeah,
Thank
I know.
you.
And then the only other thing I'll mention, there were a lot, but I'm just going to mention one last thing.
Yes, please.
You know everything about Dr. No from the beginning in terms of who he is, not what he's up to, but you know
his backstory.
Yeah, and M has another man in the room who, before James Bond even leaves, they basically brief him and tell him exactly what's going on. There is no mystery work. Leiter doesn't exist in the book. Also, Querl, I think I pronounced his name correctly. Querl. He already knew James Bond because James Bond had been to Jamaica before. So there was no fight scene. There was a scene with Taro, but he didn't sleep with her. And then the car chase scene did not happen with Bond. It happened with two other men who got killed with the cyanide cigarettes.
Oh, the cyanide cigarettes was pretty cool.
That was pretty cool.
I don't think I've actually seen that before.
Yeah,
So
that's cool.
It's like, now that I'm out of breath and we're done fighting, let me get a cigarette. Sure, no problem. Oh my God, he killed himself. What were you gonna say, Alexa?
Oh, I just not to divert from the book, but I wanted to talk about the casting of
Let's talk about the casting and then
a little behind the scenes.
Please tell us more.
Sean Connery, 32 years old, was not the first person considered for the role. In fact,
he was 32.
He
almost
was 32
60 years ago.
He was 32. Honestly, I thought he looked older. Did
He
you guys?
did.
He had like all these
Well,
lines.
he was already losing his hair at that point.
They considered Cary Grant for the role first.
Would have guessed that because they have the same type.
Yeah. Grant would have committed to one of the movies, but not the slew.
Nobody's interested in that.
So he said nope. So actually, there's this. It's a rumor, or not a rumor, but basically a lie, where it did happen. So basically what happened was they did this, find the James Bond, find an actor that will play James Bond, contest basically. The contest did find 6 finalists, 1 chosen and screen tested. It was a 28-year-old model named Peter Anthony, who, according to Broccoli, had a Gregory Peck type of quality, but proved unable to cope with the role. So then that's when they decided to screen test Mr. Connery, who, honestly, his whole story behind getting this role reminded me so much of Harrison Ford. His whole story behind, becoming Indiana Jones, and then, of course, first being Han Solo. He was this Scottish dude that was like, rough around the edges and good with his hands. I mean, that's sexual in nature sounding, but I mean, just like he's just this dude. He's this dude's dude, and he wasn't as refined as they wanted James to be. But he came in and he had this macho devil-may-care attitude, and actually the wife of, I forget the author of the book.
Ian Fleming.
The wife of Ian Fleming was the person to convince Ian Fleming and the producers to put Connery in the role. She's like, you know what? He has a certain sex appeal and charm and a devil-may-care attitude. Let's make him Bond. And of course, Sean did an amazing job. I thought he was great. He did come off, like, from the Bonds that I've seen, he did come off as more less calculated and more like, I'm just reacting, which is cool in my opinion. And I think that's what I always forget his name, the current Bond.
Daniel Craig.
Craig. That's kind of like how he comes off to me, and Pierce Brosnan is more like the calculated, like I know exactly what's going to happen when it's going to happen.
Yeah, Pierce Brosnan is more from the Roger Moore mold.
Right.
It's very, I agree with that. You referenced Albert Broccoli, and Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman produced all of these films, I think up until The Man with the Golden Gun, unless it's the one after it. I don't know if you had something on Broccoli.
I do. So what I was curious about is why they chose the 6th book of all the books to be the first one to film. And so when I did some research on it, originally they were going to do Thunderball, but there was a lawsuit involving Thunderball. Plus, it was going to be more expensive to shoot. And this involved Broccoli and his decision. And so this was actually from his autobiography, where he was talking about it in his autobiography, When the Snow Melts, from '98. But they ended up choosing Dr. No because it was going to be one of the cheapest Bond films to make in terms of location and what it was going to cost them. So that's why they went with this.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to pay your villain for 20 minutes of screen time.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, the biggest shortcoming is the fact that it all happens so fast. It all just kind of feels anticlimactic, the foiling the plans, and it's like, all he did is put on a hazmat suit and keep his head down. And but again, budget limitations will be what they are. I mean, budget limitations will sometimes take away from, it doesn't necessarily ruin a movie, but sometimes you're like, oh, just imagine if they could have spent a little more on that.
Sorry. I forgot to mention with the refining of Sean Connery, Terrence Young, the director, basically because the author was like, he looks like an overgrown stuntman, like, just like this beast of a man. He's just Scott as well. So,
sure. Wow, that's a problem, sure.
The director took him and took him to like the high life in Britain and took him around to some of the best restaurants and stuff and kind of schmoozed him a bit, and so got him ready for the role.
Yeah.
Interesting.
What were you going to say, Rachel?
I was going to say, going back, just one more thing about the book. When we were talking about the movie and saying how it felt like it really rushed to the end, that's one thing I felt like the book had the luxury of, is it takes more time in between the different scenes.
Yeah.
And so we have weeks passing by. This did not just occur in a couple of days until the very end. And when you get to the end, obviously with the movie, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, he rushes and stops everybody. In the book, he goes through an obstacle course that Dr. No makes him endure.
Sweet.
And it basically lasts for, maybe a good 15% of the book.
Wow.
So this whole ending, I felt like it really played out better in the book.
Yeah, no, I can see it being more satisfying. Again, budget limitations.
Yeah, of course.
Non-existent in the book. We do get a lot of the conventions of Bond that we see in the later films. There's reference made to Spectre, which of course is not introduced until later books I had read. It's not actually. I don't even know if it's in this book. It's not in the first couple. I don't know if did they talk about Spectre?
They talk about it in this. Yeah,
but it's not in. It's not in the first book. It sort of is a newer concept, and obviously we introduce the Bond girl with the funny name. That's something that we still tend to get. I did think it was interesting that at no time do we get the phrase shaken not stirred. We have it's mixed not stirred.
Yes,
so someone
that
tells
comes
him,
later.
but he doesn't ask for it. They just know what he likes. And I was like, oh, that's funny that's actually not in this. And we talked about how we get the theme. And
did you guys know that Sean Connery was offered Gandalf in Lord of the Rings and turned it down?
No, I didn't know that.
He turned it down because he didn't understand the script. Just didn't get it.
And then the book's older than he is.
And also he was offered the role as the architect in The Matrix and turned it down for similar reasons. Which I can understand, not really understanding The Matrix, but Lord of the Rings, it's pretty self-explanatory.
It's just play a wizard. I mean, you were in Highlander. I mean, but he really doesn't do much anymore.
No, he's retired.
I think the last film that he really did was League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and that's 2003.
He was in the Avengers. I remember seeing him. Right? The first Avengers movie?
No.
What?
No,
I thought he was.
He's not in the Avengers movie. Sean Connery? No, I mean, I've got his IMDb right here.
Really?
And,
oh, dang it. I thought he was.
No.
Oh, no. There's a guy who looks like him, but it's...
he's in the Avengers...
The
Avengers you're talking about is the one based on the TV series. Oh, you're talking about the one based on the TV series. So I thought you were talking...
1998 film.
So when you say the Avengers, what do you think I'm thinking of?
Yes, I'm correct.
No. But when you say the Avengers, what movie do you think I'm thinking of?
I don't know. What are you?
The Avengers. The real Avengers.
Oh, okay.
With Captain America and Iron Man. Yes, he was in the 1998 Avengers.
Okay, yes.
But the last movie he was in was League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
With Uma Thurman.
I forgot about those Avengers.
You're welcome.
I'm talking about the real Avengers.
Wikipedia says, not to be confused with the 2012 film.
I believe that film, the 2012 film, in the UK is released as Avengers Assemble because people didn't want it to be confused with that property, which is actually huge there. Or maybe that's just the way they advertised it. But
no, it says the Avengers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've only got under a minute, so we have to get to our point. Does it
We didn't have enough to talk about.
No, we didn't.
One.
Does it hold up, Rachel?
I say yes. I still thought it was a really well shot and well done movie. The acting was on point. I enjoyed the storyline, even if I'm just going off the movie. So yeah, I would watch this movie in theaters today.
Alexa?
Relaxa.
Yeah, no, it's just like, wait, I already asked Rachel.
So I think, most of the James Bond films are problematic in terms of sexism.
Sure.
I think they've gotten better over time, but this one, of course, being the first, it's a little iffy.
It's definitely a product of its era,
Yes.
but that's still the point. Does it hold up?
I think people would go to the theaters and see it and be a little, squicked out about certain things. But I think on a whole, this movie's a lot of fun and it does hold up.
It is fun. I think he holds up as Bond in this film.
Yes.
I think that there's no doubt about, and I think that we maybe expect more from our even just our Bond stories at this point, and the fact that it does feel all so rushed at the end. But yeah, I would say it holds up, but it almost comes apart for me towards the end, But I still think it's got the fun ending, and like Jack Lord comes around. All right, yeah, I'm
and
happy.
Sean Connery's sexy,
Yeah,
so it's
so-
fine.
And they end up in the boat together.
Right, exactly. Well, that is our time for this week. Next week, I believe we have our tie-in. Sort of a tie-in to Milan, not really, but it inspired us to pick an Akira Kurosawa film, so we're going to do The Hidden Fortress, and then we have a lot of films still yet to choose for the weeks thereafter, because this is the only James Bond film we're doing. We were going to do a bunch and lead up into the new movie, but now that's not till November.
And then Corona happened.
But that's all the time we have for now. Rachel, where do people keep in touch with you?
You can find me on Twitter at Rach Goodman or on my author Instagram account at Rachel Radner Author. If you're a fan of Outlander, Stumptown, Curb Your Enthusiasm, sometimes Picard, you can find me on all of those shows.
And Alexa Cappiello, where's your author page?
Oh, I don't have one yet.
Oh, not yet.
You can find me at Cappy, Alexa Cappy, on Instagram. I did it.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ, and all Thursdays not here, but over on AfterBuzz TV for the Star Trek Picard After Show, and then over here at 1 Pacific for Marvel Movie News. We will see you next week for The Hidden Fortress. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you then.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network. The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Popcorn Talk Network or its owners or principals.